Welcome to today's presentation, Gearing Up for Exams, sponsored by Wolters Kluwer Law and Business. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn the program over to our presenters, John Goldberg and Barry Friedman. Barry, welcome to the program.
Good evening. I'm Barry Friedman, and this is another Open Book webcast. We were here a few weeks ago talking about the first-year experience and what happens in the first-year classroom. Tonight we're here to talk to you about gearing up for exams. It's that time. In just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to my co-author, John Goldberg, who's with us this evening, and also to Claire Sooney, our illustrator and collaborator. But first, I just wanted to tell you about one very important thing. So you'll recall we have a website, www.openbooklaw.com. And what I want to tell you is that if you take your copy of the book and you open it up to the inside, you'll see that there is, I'm not so good at this part, there is a scratch-off identification number for you. And you can use that to get access to the part of our website called the Commons. And that's important because this evening we're going to be telling you about a lot of information that's there in the Commons for you to use as part of your experience getting ready for exams. So that's it for the details. John, to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Barry. Hi, Claire. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We're going to review, as Barry suggested, topics related to getting ready for exams, and that's going to include some general tips on preparation, some discussion of outlining what to do, what not to do, and then finally some thoughts about what to do on exams themselves. One other bit of business before we get started, which is come this February, we're going to have something called Exam Camp. That's going to be another webcast where we talk about exams again. Now with you having had the benefit of having experienced them. That'll be a webcast. That'll be for members of the Open Book community. So check the website for exact date and time and look for that in February. All right, enough of the preliminaries. Claire, why don't you get us started?
Great. I'm from Mark, who asks, who is the best person to talk to about preparing for exams correctly? Is it the dean, the professors, other students?
Great. Good question. I'll start with that one. The short answer, as we say in the book, is your professor for your particular class is always your best source of advice, assuming you can get it. So absolutely go to the prof. A lot of profs will volunteer information about the exam. Be thoughtful about how you do it. Think through what questions you want to ask the prof. We have some thoughts about how to do that, some tips on how to do that in the book. Check it out. But professors are always the first best option. We're here to fill any gaps with our webcast, with our book, with our website, but start with the prof and then supplement with us.
And in fact, John, we have something in the book called the Prime Directive, right, which is the #1 rule that everybody should follow is to always, no matter what we say in the book, listen to what the professor has to say.
Absolutely.
All right, great. Well, the next question we have a series of questions actually about figuring out how you're doing. Students worry that they don't get any feedback and they don't know whether they're doing enough. I have a Harvard student here who asks whether there are ways to check and see how we're doing. And another Lewis and Clark's student who asks how they will know when they've prepared enough.
All right, I'll keep talking. I'm on a roll. Look, this is the great question and the great anxiety of the first year of law school. In most classes, there just isn't a lot of feedback, and you're 10 weeks in, 8 weeks in, and wondering, how am I doing? If you check out our last webcast, which I think is up on YouTube and is also reachable on our website, in the Commons, and on the homepage, you'll find that we had some thoughts about how you can actually use class time to check to see if you're getting things. So check that out. But beyond that, by far the best way to get feedback, again, if you can't get it directly from the professor, is by taking practice exams and going over those practice exams. And we're going to talk about that later in this webcast.
Okay, great. Several people also asked for insights on how professors approach the task of exam grading, which is kind of an odd thing maybe to start with, but I thought that maybe understanding how professors grade will suggest to people how to prepare for and take the actual exams. So we have Blake B. from University of Arkansas, who asks, is there any consistent methodology in grading between professors? And another student from University of Virginia who asks what systems professors use.
Well, I'm going to put aside the temptation to use the old saw about how the professors throw the exams down the stairs and that's how they grade them. It turns out there's a lot of consistency to how professors grade. I think professors would point to some of their idiosyncratic differences, but my guess is that at the core it's the same. And it's a good question, because if you want to think about how to prepare for exams, the best thing you could understand is how are they going to be graded. So I want to talk a minute about that, and to do that what I want to do is recur to a couple of the metaphors in the book. First, in Chapter 2, we talk about the pinball theory of exam taking, and to remind you that's all about how you have to hit the bumpers. You have to tell the professor what the professor wants to hear. And to get an idea for what that is that the professor wants to hear, I want to remind you that in Chapter 1 we stress that taking exams is exactly like what a lawyer does in practice, giving advice. So if you're a lawyer, you're sitting in your office and somebody comes in and tells a story, and then you have to give them advice based on that story about what their legal position is. And that's exactly what you're going to do on exams. So you're going to read a fact pattern and you're going to be asked to identify the legal issues, to specify the legal rules, to apply those rules to the facts, and finally to draw a conclusion, what we call IRAC. And we talk about that in Chapter 3 of the book, and you've undoubtedly heard about it. And the very, very important thing to remember is that as you give that legal advice, as you answer the exam question, there's not just one answer. There are answers. There are arguments on both sides with better or worse chances of succeeding. And that's what professors are really looking for in their exams. Now, we're going to explore all of that through the conversation this evening, but that's the heart of it.
All right, great. Well, some people say that the most important part of taking an exam is outlining, and I thought we'd dig in there. I have Stephanie S. from University of Michigan who asks when students should start outlining and whether it's helpful to start outlining at the end of the course or at the end of each chapter or section.
Yeah, great question. The outlining is key. We are hardliners on this. We think you've got to do your own outlines, or whether you do it by yourself or in conjunction with some classmates. And that's because outlining is learning and outlining is thinking. It's not separate from the task of mastering the subject. You don't want to start outlining too early or too late. There, that's a very helpful answer. You want the Goldilocks solution to outlining. But a fair estimate is about now, if you're in a one-semester course, is a good time to start outlining. If you've already started, fine. If you haven't started, fine. But right around now is when you want to get going, because you've got enough of your courses, whether it's torts or contracts or whatever, you've got enough of them under your belt that you're beginning to see, I hope, some of the bigger picture issues and how different aspects of the course hang together. So, if all goes well, you get your outlines done between now and the end of classes. You'll be tweaking them, you'll be going back to them and revising them, and come beginning of December, late November, beginning of December, you'll want to start taking practice exams.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of really specific questions about outlines, but I'm wondering whether you guys have anything general to say about the topic before we get into some of the specifics.
I think I just want to underscore what John just said because it's so important. People say to me all the time, I can't outline, I don't have time to outline because I have to study. And so they go off and they get a commercial outline and then they use that to study. But what people don't understand is how outlining is studying. That and we're going to talk some, I'm sure, about the details of this, but you've got all your class notes and you have to assimilate them into what you need to know for the exam. And it's the process of going through there and picking out what's important that is teaching it to you. And if you do that, it will be in your head. You'll know it. And so this whole process that John described from now until December is an outlining process that's teaching you all the material. And I think it's really important for people to know that. Not that you shouldn't look at any commercial materials. We might talk some about that, but it really helps to do your own outline.
Okay, great. Well, Christopher B. from Suffolk Law School asks what the best structure is for the outline when taking an exam.
So that's it's somewhat course dependent and somewhat professor dependent. There's probably no one right answer, and it's also subject specific. Different subjects permit of different kinds of outlinings. We actually have some sample outlines on the Commons portion of the Open Book website, which is you use the scratch-off that Barry showed at the beginning of the webcast to get to. For example, if you're in a contracts course, contracts is set up in a way that in most classes there's a kind of logic to the subject that starts with formation, was there a contract form, that goes through consideration, that goes through breach and conditions and ends with remedies. Most contracts outlines are going to follow that form because it's sort of the life and death of a contract, if you will, and that makes sense because when it comes time for an exam, what you'll want to do is have a mini outline of your outline, an attack outline or a summary of your outline, either in your head or right in front of you if it's open book, and you'll just want to look at the facts and look at the outline. And we talk about this in the book about how you're going to want to have that outline in your head as a kind of list and have the facts of the exam in front of you, and you're going to want to compare. And we have specific techniques for how to do that to make sure that you spot all the issues, hit all the bumpers, talk about what you need to talk about.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of questions also about how to move from class and class notes into an outline. Specifically, I know you kind of mentioned that, but Kenny B. from University of Georgia asks if you have suggestions on specifically how to pull out the most relevant information from notes.
So that's a good question, and I think students, when they start to outline, don't have a feel for it often, and your experience is going to be that you're going to sit down to outline and you're going to struggle with it for a bit. Claire, I'm guessing that was your experience when you were a 1L,
Definitely.
that it took a while to find your method, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I tell people is that what outlining is about is flipping the course inside out. That you went to class every day and you learned about the cases and you went case by case and you took a bunch of notes, and now what are you doing? Well, now what you're doing is you're trying to take all that information and assimilate it by pulling out the rules. The rules are going to be the critical thing that guides you through the exams to be able to spot issues. And so what you're now doing is going through your class notes, finding the black letter principles that you learned, but then elaborating upon those principles. Undoubtedly, you were in a class where the professor drove you out of your mind by taking the rules and pushing them in one direction and pushing them in the other direction. Well, that's what you need to know now. That's what needs to be in your outline is, here was the rule, but there was an argument about it this way, and there was an argument about it that way, and there was a policy that pushed sometimes this way, and there was a restatement that pushed the other way, and that's the filler that goes underneath the rule, the information that you're going to need to know to do well on the exam.
Okay. Well, a lot of students want to know if there's a difference between outlining for different kinds of exams also. Almost more than any other question, there was a lot of emphasis on the difference between open books exams and closed book. Olivia Kay from the University of Denver asked what strategies you have for building an outline specifically for closed book exams, knowing that you have to keep in mind brevity and memorization of facts and thoroughness, etc., all at the same time. We had a lot of different questions here. I can kind of keep going through them, but maybe you can address that first.
Sure. I actually, I'm curious why there were so many questions on this, and if anybody's out there and can write in, I'd be curious to have a sense of why it's on people's minds. But I think I'm about to give a surprising answer, which is the strategy for doing an outline for open book exams as opposed to closed book exams is none at all. They're exactly the same. The two outlines are going to look precisely the same. And there are two reasons for that to bear in mind. One is, whether your exam is open book or closed book, you need to know exactly the same information. And the other is, whether your exam is open book or closed book, you're not going to have any time to go strolling through your exam looking for information. So the trick is to do the outline the same way, but then in the run-up to the exams, you're going to treat the two of those differently. You're going to be, for both of them, you're going to summarize the outline and summarize the outline. And I'm going to underscore in just a moment what John said about materials we have on the website. But then the difference is that when you go into a closed book exam, you have to have the summary in your head. And in fact, one of the things that we suggest is that you think up a mnemonic or an acronym or something to remember the main things that you covered in the class. So let me say a word about the web and then something about checklists. If you go to the Commons, you'll find that we have study materials. And we went to students who did well in the first year, and we said to them, would you send us an example of your outline, but not only your outline, but then whatever other summary materials you did, attack outlines or summaries or flowcharts, so that people who buy the book can see what different approaches they might take. But these are all approaches to summarizing what's inside the outline, because that summary is going to be hugely important when it comes to taking your exam. But in terms of the outline itself, it's the same outline for every kind of exam.
Yeah, can I just jump in on that, Claire? I agree, obviously, with what Barry's been saying, and I would just say one way to think about it is treat every exam as a closed book exam. Even if you're going to have the benefit of your outline being there with you in an open book exam is sort of like a life preserver. It's something that you hope you never have to use because if all goes well, you'll just take the exam and never even crack it open. So every exam is a closed book exam, even if in fact it's an open book exam, because that's how you know you're ready. You know you're on top of things when you can walk into your practice exam that you've created for yourself or that you've got from your professor or from us, and you take that practice exam closed book. That will tell you. You asked before, Claire, or you related some questions before about how do you know when you're ready, how do you know when you're on top of things. If you can take a practice exam closed book and get most of the issues and say something intelligent about them, you're styling.
Well, all right. I mean, so again, just to relate back to this long list of questions here, we've got somebody from University of Pittsburgh School of Law, John B., who, again, so just to clarify, I guess, his question is, do you have enough time to use your notes or books during an open exam? And I just want to really drill that in. So you think that really you should plan on not ever using them?
You know, I think I want to elaborate on what John said and tell you how you might use them. So, you know, one of the most important concepts that we talk about in the book, in Chapter 4, is the idea of making a list, what we call List A, which is a list of everything you've covered in the class, and then scrolling that list past the fact pattern. And you know, Chapter 4 of the book is a really critical chapter when it goes over that material. But so what you're going to do is take your outline and reduce it and reduce it and reduce it until it's just a checklist. And then for a closed book exam, you won't even have that checklist. So again, you have to have committed it to memory in some way. For an open book exam, the only time you might crack open that outline, I mean, I'm curious whether either of you disagree, is when you're working on something and there's something very specific you cannot remember. Well, there you've got your checklist, your table of contents, and you just open the outline right to that thing and look it up. But if you think you're going to be wandering through the outline looking for answers, I think every student who's ever taken exams will tell you that's woefully mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think you'll look at if you're allowed to bring materials in on an open book exam, you will look, and you want to look at that outline of your outline, which is we hope to be like a one-page summary, just to jog your memory about the things you should be looking for. I can't remember in an exam setting. Admittedly, this was in the age of the dinosaurs, but I can't remember flipping through an outline during the middle of an in-class exam trying to find the answer to a particular issue or that I had forgotten. Probably, in many cases, it won't be worth the time it takes to track the thing down.
Okay, great. Well, we've been talking about the differences between open book and closed book exams, but there are some also other kinds of exams. And I had Todd B. from University of Michigan Law School who writes in asking about multiple choice exams and if there's a different way to prepare for those rather than an essay exam, and also whether the black letter of the law is more or relatively important in a multiple choice exam. Maybe, John, you could speak to that?
Sure. I'll give you 4 choices. No, just kidding. So look, multiple choice questions clearly are different, obviously, in terms of the format. We don't think they're much different in terms of prep. You should be doing everything you do for essay exams or issue spotting exams the same way for multiple choice questions. Do the outlining, do the attack outline, do the outline of the outline, because you're being tested on the same stuff. We have some multiple choice questions in the book. We also have on the website a link to a different part of the website where you can buy practice exam materials, and some of those practice exams have multiple choice questions on them and multiple choice answers and explanations from the prof. So if you're facing a multiple choice question class and you're worried about not getting feedback in the sense of not getting a lot of practice with multiple choice questions, check out the stuff on our practice exam website, and you'll see there's some help there.
Okay. Are you ready for me to move on, Barry? Did you have anything to add?
No.
All right, great.
To John here.
The other area where we got a lot of questions is practice exams. Besides outlining and reviewing outlines, this is, of course, a key aspect of exam studying. And I'm wondering, why do practice exams matter so much?
Well, this is our favorite subject, and we've segued into it already. The old joke about Carnegie Hall: a guy walks up to another person in the streets of New York City and says, "How do I get to Carnegie Hall?" And the answer immediately is practice, practice, practice. That is our mantra. We can't stress enough how important practice exams are. We're total believers. You just can't hope to do well on an exam if you haven't tried your hand at practice exams at least a couple of times for each subject. Barry will talk about that in a minute, about how many is optimal or whatever, but you have to do practice exams, and you have to do them under the right conditions.
That makes perfect sense to me just as a student. I mean, thinking, like, when I took the LSAT, for instance, it would be insanity to go into the LSAT having never looked at a practice exam. I mean, that's all we did. And so, this is maybe one of those small ways in which the LSAT actually has some bearing on law school.
Yeah. I'm not going to comment on that, but John was talking earlier about outlining as sort of, it's a glide path into exams, and I think, you take John's point where you know your outline so well that you don't need to study it anymore. You know the material in there, and that's when it's time to take a practice exam, and then that brings you right into the finals. I mean, I know we got some questions about how many practice exams, and the answer is as many as you can do, but you're not going to be able to do very many. I mean, 1 for sure, 2 is ideal, and I'd be surprised if most people get the time to do 3 and really do them the way they need to be done.
Okay, great. Well, what about timing then? Todd B. from University of Michigan Law School wants to know when to begin taking practice exams. John?
Yeah, well, I think Barry just addressed that, but I think the answer is you want to be pretty far along in your outlining and ideally done with your outlining. Now, the world isn't always ideal. Law professors, not us, other law professors have the nasty habit of trying to play catch-up in the last week of their courses and dump a huge amount of information on the students just as they're desperately trying to finish their outlines. And that's a mean trick that some of us will play. And so it's hard. You can't always neatly wrap things up so that your outline is done and beautiful and pretty and memorized, and then I'll take the practice exams. You have to make some compromises. But that having been said, you're looking at, you've got to be well into outlining to get some value out of the practice exams. And so you're talking in a typical one-semester schedule, you're talking, for right around the turn from November to December, first week of December.
Okay. So then Chris B. from Suffolk Law School asks, what is the best way to use previous exams? So how do you take these practice exams and really maximize them? Barry, maybe you could speak to that.
Sure. So, I just want to reiterate what John said, which is that if you jump to taking the practice exams too early, then you're wasting them. You may not have that many available. There aren't always that many available, though I know we're going to talk about some of the ones we have on our website. But, the best thing you do always is get practice exams from the professor. And so if you glance at the practice exam in some casual way before you're ready to take it, you'll have ruined the practice exam for yourself. You'll already have a sense of what's going on. So the best thing to do is, get your professor's exam, keep it undercover, and then when you're ready to do it, sit down and take that exam and work your way through it, meticulously. What we call real time. Do it in real time. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, this actually leads really naturally into the next question, which is from Chris G. at Boston University. And he wants to know what to do if the professor doesn't make the practice exams available. John, maybe?
So different professors do different things about this. Some have old exams on file without answers. Some have old exams on file with answers, model answers. Some have nothing at all, and it just varies from professor to professor. As Barry said a moment ago, you absolutely, first best option is to get old exams from your prof in the class. And if he or she gives model answers or goes over them in class, fabulous. That's going to be a really important moment in your studying. But what we've tried to do, and a lot of what this book is about, is again filling gaps where we can. And so we have on our website, as I mentioned earlier, a link to an entire suite of practice exam materials. And the whole point of these materials is to give people the opportunity to take practice exams and get a form of feedback in the absence of sufficient feedback, or if they want more feedback than what they're getting from their profs. So in each of these in this suite of exam materials, there's 19 different exams by 19 different professors from around the country. They're actual exams. They cover all the core first-year classes. You get the exam, you get a model answer, and you get actual student answers. And all of them are annotated by the professor who gave the exam to give you insight. Why did the question look this way? Why was this student's answer a better answer or a worse answer? We think this is the best way we could think of to come up with feedback short of actual feedback from your actual professor teaching your class. So go to openbooklaw.com, check it out, look for the practice exams link, and we think if you're really looking for practice exam materials, you'll be pleased at what you find.
Yeah, Claire, if I can just add one word. John aptly describes that. The way we came about doing this is that when we wrote the book, the folks at Aspen sent it out to students to review and to professors to review and to writing instructors and academic support personnel. And the students gave us one uniform message, which is that they were just desperate for more in the way of practice exams and also feedback. And we thought, how do you get people feedback? I mean, it's the thing you hear all the time as a law professor, is that people want feedback. And so, again, we went to people that we knew were great teachers, and we asked them not only to give us their exams and answers, but to literally annotate those, showing students where, with the student answers, people had gone right and gone wrong. And so that's what you find there, done with these little, Post-it notes.
Okay. Well, again, that leads really naturally into the next question, which is about future feedback and prospects for it. We have Stephanie from UNLV who asks, will we receive feedback or comments on the exam so that we know where the areas are that we need to improve for next time?
Yeah, professors just vary on this enormously, and I think I want to say a word about what I think the best practice might be for professors, and then also a word about why professors might fall down in some aspects of this. So I know that I believe and that John believes that when you give an exam, you have an obligation to, after the exam is over, give the students some feedback to show them, what was the right answer. I mean, how are you supposed to learn if you can't see what happened? And so I think what most people do, what I've typically done, is I'll do a model answer, and I ask students to take their exam and match it up against the model answer, and then see where things went wrong. And that's the most feedback that you usually will get. And I think it's because professors often don't know what else to say. I've felt at times like I didn't know what else to say, but we've worked pretty hard to outline in the book, ways that you can go wrong. We talk about them in the book, about ways that you can go wrong, what the problems can be. And then again, with the practice exam suite, we've asked these other professors to be, very self-conscious about what students did right and wrong so that they can improve.
Yeah, can I just jump in there too, which is we are believers in model answers. There's model answers to some of the questions in the book on the Commons part of the website. The exam suites all have model answers, but we say this with the following caution, which is model answers aren't actually model answers in the sense of this is what your answer should look like. Think of model answers as the equivalent of an airbrushed photograph of a model in a magazine. They're perfect, they may not be perfect, but they're answers that the prof has prepared and carefully crafted in a way that no in-class exam answer could possibly look like. And so I remember the first time I looked at a model answer, I was incredibly dispirited because I was like, oh my God, my exam doesn't look anything like that. Well, no exam looks like a model answer. Model answers are ideals. They help you see what you got and what you didn't get and how to improve, but you shouldn't measure your actual exam performance by, gee, did I write the model answer?
I tell my students all the time that when I grade exams, the best exam in the class, the best exam in the class might have 50% of what I thought were the available points on that exam. And it's not because people do poorly, but I had the advantage of designing the exam. I knew what I was putting into it, and they're under time pressure, and they don't have time to write all of that. But I think it is a good point, and it's why it's useful to see how other students did, including students who got an A and might not have nailed the exam compared to the model answer.
All right. Well, I also have a huge number of questions from students asking about the days and even the 24-hour period leading up to exams themselves. It's just incredibly confusing knowing what to do with your time and your energy, and it's this sort of frantic feeling, as I recall at least. So let's see, which of these questions? How do you spend your time studying the day before the exam? Should you have a blackout period? Should you, should you wait? Should you be studying the night before? There's a question from Brian V. at UNLV who asks what are good brain foods to eat the morning before the test.
Sardines. Eat sardines. They're excellent brain food. And anchovies, too. So it's a good question, and everybody does wonder about it, and in a sense it's going to be different for everybody. I remember that I would always study into the evening, and then I wished my phone would ring and somebody would say, come in now and take the exam, because I hated nothing worse than the sort of having to go to sleep, anxious about the exam, and then get up and go take it when I had it all in my head and I was ready to go. So I want to talk about that glide path for one more moment and then focus on the period right before the exam. You've done your outline. You know where the legal issues are. You've got the law down cold. You then take your practice exam, maybe 2 practice exams. You discuss them with a friend or a study group or whoever and go over it and see how everybody did and if they caught stuff. And now you're getting really close. At some point, a day before the exam, or maybe it's only 6 hours before the exam, you might feel like, okay, you're ready. What to do? And everybody has their own thing to do. Yes, it's good to take a break. I'm a big fan of that. The thing I did, and I'm actually curious about the two of you, but the thing I often did when I felt that I knew the material was I'd go back and I'd read some of the key cases in the class. I'd read some of the, Hadley versus Baxendale in contracts, or Pennoyer versus Neff in civil procedure. And it was interesting to see how my understanding of the law was enhanced at that point by having learned it so well, and how reading the cases really brought it alive for me. So that was one of my tricks. I don't know, Claire, did you have any sort of last-minute tricks?
For me, I guess my learning style is a little bit different perhaps than the classic law student, but for me, I learn so much from talking to people, and so you have to find the right people to talk through stuff with, but I just sat down and sort of talked through some of the most important concepts, and really, for me, saying them out loud and hearing other people repeat them back was really helpful. And again, you don't want to do that with the people who are going to be really stressed out and who are going to make you feel more frantic and make you feel like you don't know enough, but
Right.
It was helpful for me to just kind of sit and kind of let it all just sink in, because I knew that I had what I could get thus far, so all I could do then was kind of marinate in it.
Yeah, my memory's fading, but I'm pretty sure I spent a lot of my days before doing something we talked about earlier, which is memorizing the attack outline. Even for the open book exams, I would just, invent mnemonics and maybe, write out, try from memory to write out the outline of my outline. And I often couldn't do it, but I'd get a lot of it. And that was just a way, again, of making sure that the basic categories for contracts or torts, or the basic elements and issues that I knew I was going to need to trot out on the exam were right there in the front of my brain. But definitely don't, in terms of wellness, don't stay up all night the night before an exam. That's not going to be worth it.
Yeah, actually, can I, Claire, if you'll forgive me, I just want to point out a couple of things that are in the book that I think are really important on this point. So, at some level, it's interesting, we get all these questions from people about preparing and outlining and practice exams, all incredibly important, as we've been talking about. And as I scanned questions that we'd received, we got relatively few about taking exams, at the heart of taking exams, and I know we're going to talk about that, but I'd really direct people to Chapter 4 in the book and Chapter 8 in the book. Chapter 8 might be the most important chapter because it talks about this rigorous process of how to maximize your points on an exam. And one of the things you're going to get out of Chapter 4 and Chapter 8 is that you absolutely have to have a list of what was covered in the course, because you've got to ferret out of the exam, what are the things the professor wants you to discover. And so John's right, I think, that, in the very run-up, getting this memorized sense in your head of everything that you covered, not everything you covered in the sense of you've memorized everything in the course, but what were all the topic headings of the course is, I think, critical. I'll also point out, since I'm talking and would like to keep talking, and so everybody can wait till I'm done talking, is that also in the book are 2 chapters that I think you'll find comforting. So one of them is a chapter on, what to do when things go wrong, what to do when you're in there taking your exam and you realize that you're missing a page of the exam, or it's the night before and your computer eats all of your notes. By the way, we stress backing up is an important thing to do. But so we've got a chapter about that stuff, and then at the very end we've got a chapter on, wellness and sanity and Zen. And so, this might be a good time to read that as well. I'll stop now. I'm done.
Okay, I thought we'd turn from preparation now to actually taking the exams, like you were saying, some sort of the more core of these actual exam technique and issue spotting. Let's see, I have a question here from Kenny B. at University of Georgia, who just wants to know what the best way to issue spot on an exam is, and especially under the pressure of, a timed exam.
So I'm going to jump on that because it relates to exactly what I was just saying. So, we talked about IRAC. We've got a chapter on IRAC. People are familiar with IRAC. But from IRAC, the 2 most important parts of IRAC for an exam are spotting issues and then applying the law to the facts of the exam. The professors expect you to know the rules down cold. The conclusions don't matter that much because they're probabilistic. I mean, there's not going to be one clear conclusion. But it's the issue spotting and the application. And issue spotting is essential, because if you can't find the issues in the exam, you can't get any points for having identified them. The way I grade is I list all of my issues on a sheet, and then I divide the page in half because I want the arguments on both sides, and you get 1 point if you spot the issue, and you get 2 points if you discuss it well, and 3 if you discuss it really, really well. Well, how do you catch all these issues? Well, the most important thing you can do, as we've been saying over and over, and as we describe in elaborate detail in the book, is to have one of these checklists, to have one of these summaries of what you covered in the class, so that you can always be asking yourself, does this question raise promissory estoppel? Does this question raise a damages issue? Does this question John's sitting there thinking Barry should stop talking about contract law, so I could switch to civil procedure or constitutional law. But the point is, you need one of these checklists, because that's the trick to spotting the issues, and we talk all about that in the part of the book where we talk about issue spotting.
Okay. Well, that actually, sort of your comments here, again, lead well into the next question. Matt S. from BU wrote in with what looks like a technique question, but I wanted to get to it now because I think it really emphasizes what you've mentioned as an essential skill. And his question is about arguing both sides and how to do it while maintaining readability, and how to avoid the sort of, well, if A says X and B says Y, and sort of,
Right.
without being really formulaic that way.
Sure. What's the best way to put this? So I think you shouldn't worry too much at the end of the day about elegance of prose. It's much more important, as Barry was just suggesting, to get the arguments out there on the page, even if it is in a formulaic, clunking way. You are not, I know of very few law professors who award style points or elegance points. Now, remember the prime directive. There may be some who are out there, and if your professor tells you elegance matters, then you've got to take that into account in how you write your answer. But I'm guessing that professor is a pretty rare bird. For most professors, get it out on the page, say it even if it's said in a clunky way, even if it's, well, X will argue ABC, but Y will counter ABC. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with writing that way, and in fact, it's a perfectly good way to write because it shows that you're appreciating their arguments on both sides, as there will be for all of the interesting issues. So my basic advice is don't worry about style.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I thought of a way to make John's point pretty graphically. So in the practice exam suites on our website, in addition to professors, putting in the little sticky notes for things, we created these stickers or stamps that they could slide in where students were doing certain things right or wrong. And there's not lots of stamps that we created. And sort of the two most important is a stamp that's called ABS, or ABS with a line through it, meaning a student wasn't doing it. And ABS stands for argues both sides. So if you're not arguing both sides on my exam, you're losing half the points right out of the gate. The other sticker or stamp that we have is one that's like F line L. So what's F line L? Means you're not applying the facts to the law. And applying the facts to the law means saying, look, the plaintiff's going to argue that based on these facts, under this rule, I win, and the defendant's going to have an argument why under those same facts, understanding the rule, they're going to win. And that's, as John says, elegance doesn't matter. It's getting those arguments out that's going to be ringing the bumpers, that's going to get you points.
Okay. Well, we have a question that just came in from a student at Washington University in St. Louis, asking whether students should make up hypotheticals with the exam if the facts aren't clear enough to lead to a conclusion. So should students add into exams?
Well, probably not, is my instinct. I guess I'd put it this way. Look, if you have if you're wrestling with a difficult issue and there's a way to make an argument or frame an argument by using a hypothetical to prove your point, that's great. Hard to do on the fly in the pressured setting, at least of an in-class exam. If you can, as you know, when lawyers argue and when professors teach classes, they love pulling out hypos, variations on the case. Well, true, this case comes out this way, but what if we change fact A? Now what? That's a great way for capturing the context and limits of different rules and how they apply under different circumstances. If you have the time and the wherewithal to pull one of those out in your exam answer, more power to you. But I don't think typically professors are giving fact patterns where they're asking you to sort of invent whole new fact patterns for you to think about and analyze apart from the ones they've already given you.
That makes sense. Sort of similarly, we've got another question from BU that asks, when do you know when to insert a policy argument into an answer? Barry, maybe you could talk to that?
Sure. That's it's a good question, and we get asked it a lot. I do, for sure. And I'm going to give a short answer, but then I want to just graphically show something that John was talking about that leads to this. So the short answer is the policy becomes relevant at the time that the law runs out. So actually, I'll tell you, there's a joke that lawyers sometimes tell, which is that they say, when you've got a case, if you've got the facts, argue the facts. And if you've got the law, argue the law. And if you don't have the facts or the law, pound on the table. So policy arguments are the pounding on the table. It's the, I'm losing under the law, but the law is terrible in this case. It's inequitable. So John was talking about, the hypotheticals in your outline. When you've got the black letter law down there, and you go through your notes, and this is why it's so important to go through your notes and do your outline, you'll see that the professor said, okay, so the rule's X, but what if fact A changed or fact B changed? And that's good stuff to put in your outline, and then the professor will say, and the restatement says, or this is the policy behind that, and you get that in your outline. So then when that comes up on the exam, you not only have the rule, but you can say, you can see this is a variation of what we learned in class, so I can see why I'm going to use this slight version that's different, and then I'm going to turn to the policy argument and say why under that policy argument one side or the other should win.
Okay, great. That's a lot, though. That's a lot to do. And when it comes to writing exams, one of the real challenges is really figuring out how to allocate your time, at least for me, and especially with the in-class exams. We actually have a bunch of topics on time allocation. Jenna J. from the University of Georgia asks how much time should be delegated to reading the question and outlining before you start to answer. And then Jacqueline R. Asks, when there are numerous hypos on the exam, how do you suggest splitting each one up? Maybe, let's see, maybe Barry?
Sure. I'm actually just looking at my notes here because I actually had wanted to remember where we put something in the book. Yeah. So we have a recommendation. This is in, by the way, the all-important Chapter 8, but we have a recommendation in the book that when you get your exam, you preview it. It doesn't mean that you go over the whole exam carefully. You won't have time to do that. But that you flip through the exam and you look through the exam to figure out where the issues, at least roughly, are buried. I mean, in your towards class, if there's 3 essay exams, the chances are that there are not going to be 3 negligence questions and the professor didn't deal with strict liability at all. It's not going to be that way. So give it a scan and figure out if you can at least see where the big themes of the class are located in each question. Then you settle down to your question, and we have a very elaborate methodology in the book for what to do. But the essence of it is to take this all-important list that we keep talking to you about and that we describe at length in the book and sort of scroll the facts of the question past that list and see what are the issues. And I'm a fan of an outline, but when I say, have an outline to your question, I don't mean that you've got like Roman 1 and sub A and sub B. I mean, you'll never have time to write everything down, and students all the time find that, they've completely run out of time. But I always think it's important, as you discover the issues, to jot a list for yourself, and then to just take one moment to sort of, what I do is I'd write down next to each element in the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, the order in which I want to talk about them. And then I cross them off after I talked about them, because it's, back in the days when students had to turn in scrap paper, and it's not like that anymore, it happened all the time that the student would come into my office and say, but see, I had it on my scrap paper, and I meant to write it down, and I forgot. And so, don't forget. The trick, I think, is to take a little bit of time up front to figure out what the issues are, and make a list for yourself, and then systematically work through your list and check, and make sure you touched on everything you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, let me just add a word. I know we're 3/4 of the way through, but I just wanted to...
Is that a hint for me to talk less? Is that what
no,
you're
not at all.
Time allocation.
It is about time allocation. This is another moment where practice is incredibly important. The only way you're going to get good at time management is by taking a lot of practice exams. That's when you'll find out, oh man, it took me 1.5 hours to answer that question, but I was supposed to answer it in 45 minutes. All right, well, now you've got some work to do. So use the practice exams not only to test your knowledge of the law and your ability to write, but also your time management.
Great. Well, we have a question that's sort of similar, but maybe gets at a little different aspect. It's from Cheyenne S. at Washington University, who's a foreign LLM student, which is great. And she asks for general advice on what the most important part of the answers are if you're running up against time limitations, and if there are parts that can be omitted more generally.
Yeah, again, I think the first thing that goes overboard is elegance. If you're tight on time, you just want to get out on the page as much as you can, and by that I don't mean reciting the rules. That's not going to get you points. You got to hit the bumpers, but if you see some bumpers, see some issues, you're in civil procedure and you see there's an eerie problem, but you haven't had time to talk about it, all right, well, get it down. Even if there's 10 minutes left, say, there's an eerie problem here. Under the X case, defendant will argue da-da-da, plaintiff will argue da-da-da. Even if it's the most inelegant 3 sentences you've ever written in your life, that'll get you some points. That'll hit you some bumpers. Even outlining, some professors, not all, some professors will give you credit even if you outline in your actual exam answer in a way that it indicates enough that you're actually doing analysis and making an argument rather than just reproducing materials from the course. You can get points, partial credit for that. Show your work, get it out on the page, even if it's ugly, it'll help.
Great. One thing I think I've actually heard you guys say as well before is just not to dwell too much on the more obvious parts of the question, and when there's pieces of the question that are really straightforward and out there, just to get them down and move on, and then to really engage in the meatier parts, the parts where the law is maybe more on the edge or less clear.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably what the professor's testing for. With the caution, and I guess I've had this caution as I've listened to the conversation, that I want to go back to the fundamentals, which is, go read the pinball chapter again. I can't tell you how many students waste words on exams. I read lots of words that don't need to be there because they're trying to show me how elegant or thoughtful they are. I'm looking for the bumpers. I'm looking to know what the issue was, what was the rule, and what was the argument on each side, and then move on. And so, yes, you want to get to the crux of the issue, the heart of the issue, and not waste space on what doesn't matter.
Yeah, we call that in the book issue sorting as opposed to issue spotting, and we have a whole bit on how to issue sort for exactly to ensure that you're writing efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, John uses this analogy of fishing, and there's a net, and you have to figure out, how to catch the big fish and let the other ones go, how to figure out which are the issues that matter the most, and that's issue sorting.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of questions also about actual exam writing, again, getting at some of the same stuff you guys have been talking about in terms of how important it is to be clear and concise. But here's this question from Chris G. at Boston University asks whether, he said, students often claim that the exam taker who writes the most words will receive a higher grade. Is there any truth in that notion?
I'll jump on that. Not in my class. I put word limits on exams, and I then try to write model answers that stay within them. I don't always do it because I'm trying to point out what students did right or wrong as well. I think when people say that verbosity matters, all that they're trying to say, and there is some truth to this, is jam down all the issues that you can see and analyze them as quickly as you can. I remember one of my professors came up to me and said, you did well on that exam, but you could have done better, but you were shotgunning it, meaning I was just shooting at every possible conceivable issue. And I said to him, and I still feel this way, well, if you didn't write shotgun exams, I wouldn't take them that way. But the truth is, most law school exams are shotgun exams. They want you to address all these issues. And so you got to do it. And in that sense, yes, keep moving, keep working through your outline, get stuff down on paper. But that doesn't mean, words could just mean words that don't get you any points. You got to be hitting the I know I sound like a broken record here, but you got to be hitting the bumpers. Okay. You got to be hitting the bumpers.
Well, so I've got a student from the University of Virginia who also asks, is there an optimal number of cases to cite in an answer? Maybe, John, you could talk to that?
No. Again, you'll want to ask your prof in each of your classes how much they care about this. Citing cases by name is great, or often by the name of one party, Paul's graph, whatever, is useful as a shorthand way, and it's a way of economizing as you're trying to make an argument. But the important point is not to prove that you've memorized the case, or prove that you've memorized the case name, or prove that you've memorized the rule in the case. The important thing is to use the case, to use the arguments in the case, to use the rules in the case. And so if you're citing a case, it should be as part of an argument or as part of analysis, not just to prove that you know it.
Okay. Here's another one of the foreign LLMs at Washington University expressing anxiety that all students share, which is how hard the profs are on answers. The student asks whether the grade, to what extent grades will be affected if you just straight up misunderstand certain facts or misapply certain legal rules.
Look, it happens. It happens to everybody. As Barry said earlier, if you nail an exam, you may well have gotten 50 or 60% of the issues on the exam. So no one walks into an exam and gets it all. And certainly not on my exams. And I think you're going to make mistakes. You're going to miss stuff. Everyone does. You shouldn't feel bad about that. Use the list. That's key to minimize those errors. And also there's part of the book towards the end on, as Barry said, how to deal with emergencies. What happens if things really go badly? Their worst fears come true. The exam is missing a page. Your notes disappear, the room is uncomfortable, blah, blah, blah. These happen, not often, but they happen, and we have strategies for dealing with them. And I think, looking at my clock, we've got about 5 minutes, so maybe we should try to offer some general observations and then wrap it up.
Great, yeah. I mean, if we can conclude with some sort of big picture questions.
Yeah.
Will M. from Lewis and Clark asks about the most important skill to acquire prior to diving into exam taking. Maybe you can just use that as a jumping off point to talk more broadly.
Sure. Barry, you want to start?
When you said sure, I thought you were going to start. Yes, I'd be glad to. I actually do have a view about the single most important skill, and it is, yet again, this thing that we talk about in Chapter 4 and Chapter 8 about making this list, and we talk about the matching technique of matching your list to the facts that are in the exam. And I think that simple process of having your list that we talk about how to prepare, and having it sitting right next to you or in your head if it's a closed book exam, and then scrolling the facts past that list and uncovering the issues in the way we say. I think that is the single most important thing, because if you do that and if you manage to convey that on your exam, you will hit a lot of bumpers. So that's my first choice. I don't know, John or Claire, if you have different choices.
I think that's right, and the only other thing I'll say, which I said before and which you've said before, is the only equally important message I can think of is practice, 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 practice. You've got to take those practice exams. You have to take them under what we call real-time conditions. That means like you're in an exam with your iPod off in a quiet place. Don't spend 15 minutes thumbing through the practice exam and saying, okay, I get it. That's not a practice exam. A practice exam is sitting down for 2 hours and slogging through and getting all the issues and then going over it. We've tried to provide a lot of materials that will help you do that and do it in a way that's fruitful. It's on the website, but I just can't stress enough how critical it is that you practice and practice properly.
Yeah, I actually am going to just echo that in a funny way, which is, I hate it as a law student. I can remember to this day, I remember the last exam I took, which actually was my New York driver's license test, but and the one before that was the bar exam. But before that was my law school exams, and I hated taking those exams. And because I hated taking them, I didn't mind learning the law. I didn't even mind outlining. I just hated sitting there, in a frantic twist trying to get all that stuff down on paper. But I made myself do it on practice exams, and I had, a buddy who I would then go over them with. And I think it's because, it's just like how outlining is studying, even though you think you need to get your outline done to study, that's studying. Practice exams is studying too, because then you're seeing what you know and don't know and going back and consulting your outline and figuring out, what you knew and what you didn't know.
Just to kind of echo that, I think for me, really, I did look at practice exams and I outlined my answers, but I didn't, even though I outlined them what I thought was very meticulously, I didn't actually type out answers. And going back to it now, I think I would have. I think I would have actually written them out, because I think there's something different that happens when you have to translate them into sentences. Just a different kind of processing.
Yeah, one thing that happens, for example, is you start thinking of other things. And we say in the book, as you're doing that, write down on your list something else you want to cover. And I think until you start to spell things out, you don't see that.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's tuned in. We really appreciate your time, especially at this busy time of the semester and in the evening for a lot of you. Again, reminder, we'll be back on the air in February for exam camp. Check the website for notices about that. Please visit the website. We think we've done a lot, everything we know how to do to make getting ready for exams and taking exams as successful as possible, and we really encourage you to check it out.
I want to add 2 last words. One of them is substantive, which is I just want to remind everybody that it's about arguments, not answers. They're there to be making arguments on their exam. And the second is, here it is again, your scratch off. All that stuff John's talking about on the website is free. We put it there to help you out. So scratch off, go in, stroll around the Commons and see what we've got there that will help you do your exam prep. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that does conclude today's webcast, Gearing Up for Exams, sponsored by Wolters Kluwer Law and Business and presented by Barry Friedman and John Goldberg, along with today's content moderator, Claire Suni. At this time, we ask each person attending to complete an evaluation of the presentation. To do so, simply click on the presentation links icon. It looks like a paperclip, and then click the link titled Online Evaluation. Please be sure to take a few minutes to fill out the evaluation. Your feedback will help us provide you with future quality programming. Today's program is copyright 2011, Wolters Kluwer Law and Business, all rights reserved.